Welcome back. If you're new here, hi, I'm Julianne from Frizzy Bee. Here you're gonna find crochet tutorials, live video chats where I sip on my coffee and we work on our whips together, and so much more than that. And if you are tuning in again, welcome back. Today, what I wanted to do was to talk about the 5 tips that I have for beginning crocheters, specifically for when you're working on amigurumi. Without further ado, let's dive on in. My very first tip, if you are brand new to crocheting, is do not use black yarn. Black yarn, I mean, you can even see it on the camera, right? It's very difficult to see. And so when you're crocheting with black yarn and you're trying to make sure that you're getting the stitches and you're brand new to crochet, it is very, very difficult and can be very frustrating to actually work on an amigurumi because you miss stitches, you don't know exactly where your stitches are, and that can adjust the shape of your piece. So as you get more seasoned, you can start working with black yarn more. In fact, this is my newest pattern, which is a little ladybug, and that's made with black yarn. But when you're first starting out, I'm telling you guys, avoid black yarn. It is very difficult to work with. Tip number 2. When you get a new skein of yarn, you'll notice on the label, it's going to tell you the recommended size for your hook. So for example, this Karen 1 pound, it's telling me that the recommended size is a US size H hook. Okay. Now this is a US size H hook, which is 5 millimeters. When I use this particular yarn, which is an acrylic yarn, it's a 4-ply or worsted weight yarn, I would rather use a 3.5 millimeters. So you'll see the size difference right here. Okay. Here we go. Do you see how thick this hook is compared to this hook? Now, a lot of times on these labels, they're using that hook size to make something like a blanket or something of that nature, not an amigurumi. Okay, so the reason that you want to size down on your hook and not use what they're saying on the label is because it's going to leave gaps in your amigurumi and you're stuffing your amigurumi, right? So if you're making a piece and you're, especially in the beginning, when your tension is not always consistent and you're using a bigger hook, you're introducing more ability for there to be gaps in your work. And through those gaps, you're going to see stuffing. In fact, the first thing that I ever made was off of a crochet amigurumi pattern that was in just like a basics of crochet book, and it was at the very back of the book, and it was a koala. Okay, so not only did I mess up because I did the very first what we just talked about, which was do not use black yarn. Well, the koala had a black nose, so that was my first issue, right? I already used black yarn. The second issue was that my tension wasn't great, and I didn't know that, hey, if you have loose tension, size down your hook, right? Get a smaller, thinner hook, because then you're not going to have as much gapping in between your stitches. So needless to say, my koala with the black nose had white stuffing peeking through the nose because my stitches weren't very consistent and they were definitely gaps in between, you know? So that's number 2, size down. And especially with amigurumi, since most of the time you're stuffing them, you don't want to see that stuffing coming through. Tip number 3. Sometimes you want to do some embellishing, right? When you're making amigurumis, and fun fur seems like a good idea. Like that'll make it nice and fuzzy. So that's exciting. In fact, I made a soot sprite, which is a character from a Studio Ghibli film, and they're very fuzzy. They're little fuzzy black balls, basically, of soot with little eyes. And so I wanted to use fun fur. But if you're just using fun fur, again, not only is it black, there's also a fuzziness to it, right? It's not just a thin strand like this. And so it makes it even more difficult to see your stitches. Nearly impossible, actually, in which case you're basically just shooting for the best shot, you know, when you're trying to find those stitches. You're not necessarily going into the stitch, but it's right around where the stitch would be. And so you're kind of like, okay, well, that's just, we're going to call that good, you know. So what I would recommend, if you can, is to actually, and especially because fun fur and yarn like this, it's very thin, hold it with a strand of the same color, because that'll give it a little bit of thickness, which is going to help you see your stitches. And it's also going to give you that same fuzzy effect that you're looking for. So if you're doing some sort of a hair or fuzzy scarf or something for your Ami, or whatever it is, throw in a strand of the acrylic yarn, or could it be cotton if you'd like, but just like a 4-ply worsted weight sort of strand. And it works so well, you guys. Oh my gosh, it's so much easier to see your stitches this way. And then you get that same effect. So that would be my tip number 3. Tip number 4. When you're first starting out and you're doing a magic ring to start your amigurumi, which is that very base first round, right? It'll say something like 6 single crochet in a magic ring. I've got 2 suggestions for you here, okay? The first one is that first single crochet that you're doing in the magic ring, do it a little bit looser, okay? Give yourself a little bit looser of a tension than you might be normally using, especially if you have tight tension. Make sure it's loose, little bit loose. I'm not saying like hugely, like just pulling out these big strands, right? Now, just make it looser than you would normally do. And then after that, you can continue on. It's that first stitch as you're trying to go back in for your second round, that first stitch tends to be the tightest, and it makes it really, really difficult to start round 2. So by making that 1 stitch looser just slightly, it allows you to start round 2 without frustration. And when you're new to something like making amigurumi, you want to avoid at all costs things like that that are going to just frustrate you and make you feel like you're not doing it right. And it has nothing to do with the fact that, you know, it's not that you're not doing it right. It's that that is the hardest thing. I even still have trouble with that because I don't even take my own recommendations, and I'll make it too tight. And then I have the hardest time starting round 2. Just a little bit looser. You're not going to notice that it's looser as you look at the piece when it's finished, you know, and it just helps you get that second row started. And then, you know, once you get it going, it's much easier. It's that, I'm telling you, it's that stitch. The first stitch of the second round is always the most difficult. So just make it a little bit looser and help yourself out, okay? The other part of this is that I like to use what's called a double magic ring. Now, I'm going to link that for you here in the cards. I do have a video showing you how to do a double magic ring. But just to let you know the difference, with a single, just a regular magic ring, you're just wrapping it around your fingers 1 less time than if you're doing the double. You're going to wrap it 1 more time. So you end up with 2 loops, and then you start pulling 1 loop. You see which one comes in. You grab the one that's moving, pull that tight. Now you just have 1 loop, and then you pull that tight. And what that's doing is basically it's wrapping 2 strands of yarn on the inside of the magic ring. And that helps it so that it will not gap. It's not going to start loosening over time. You're not going to get one of those magic rings that looks like a nostril hole or something like that. So it just makes it even tighter, and it makes it look more polished in my mind, in my opinion. So that would be my sort of part, what you call it, 4B, if you will. Just a little extra tip there when you're first getting started. So double magic ring, and make that first stitch into the ring slightly looser, okay? Tip number 5, don't overstuff. It's like you don't want to overthink something, right? Don't overstuff it either. So when you're doing amigurumis, you have the tendency to want to just like, it's a plushie, right? I want to stuff it nice and filled and nice and packed in there. But when you're first starting out and your stitches are not always as tight as they will eventually get for your tension, you're gonna start seeing the stuffing poking through, and nothing screams new crocheter like seeing stuffing through the stitches. So don't overstuff it, especially if your stitching is not as tight as you would like, okay? Because you don't want to see the stitches through there. You want to make sure that your stitching's nice and tight. And if it's not, and if it's looser, just stuff it a little bit less than you normally would. And what that's going to do is prevent your stitches from having to separate to enclose that stuffing, that extra stuffing. Okay, so it's not going to stretch your stitching. It's going to just let it lay flat, which is going to allow it so that you're not going to see the stuffing through it. And I'm going to give you a bonus tip, number 6. I always recommend, instead of doing a regular decrease, to do an invisible decrease. The invisible decrease is just that. You're working in the front loops only when you are invisible decreasing or decreasing these 2 stitches together to make 1. You're using the front loops only, and by doing that, it's not a giant bump where the decrease is. So it's less noticeable. It's more invisible, if you will. And when you are new to crochet, you know, that is one additional thing that can just help your piece look even more polished. When you can't see the decreases because they're worked so well into the piece that they're not visible, right? So that's just a little hack. And this is one that I didn't know for the longest time. I had no idea an invisible decrease existed until many years into crocheting. So I'm telling you this right now so that you can start off your crochet journey with the right tools in your toolbox. So I'm going to link a video here that I've done that talks about invisible decreasing. And that way you can have a look-see and learn how to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this short little video. These are my 5 tips, actually 6. I gave you a bonus one for new crocheters, especially when you are learning how to crochet amigurumi. If you like this video, go ahead and pop a heart down in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you're let know anytime I post new videos here on Frizzy Bee. Thanks, guys.